Welcome to Streetlights Podcast, a podcast focused on arts and cultures through the eyes of Black viewers and Black creatives.
With your hosts, Janelle Ismay and
Jalen McDuffie.
Let's get straight to it. On this week's episode of the Streetlights Podcast, Jalen and I are dipping our foot into film analysis with everyone's new favorite whodunit series, Knives Out.
When you start talking about the term glass onion, we have to, of course, shout out the famous Beatles song by the same name, Glass Onion. Janelle,
Yes.
tell us more about that?
Okay, so Glass Onion by the Beatles. I just found out about the song when I watched the movie because, we're young and Black. A lot of people don't know about the Beatles.
I am a Beatles fan. Let me just state that. But I did not know about that song either.
Yeah. I know a couple Beatles songs just because I listen to a lot of music, but Glass Onion I wasn't aware of. So I went and listened to the song. I really liked it, and I know they talked about how a lot of the lyrics in Glass Onion are making fun of people who overanalyze the Beatles
songs.
Music.
Yeah,
I honestly thought that was hilarious, and I thought it was a really good song to use for this movie because when you watch the movie, it's literally the simplest plot
it literally
could
is
have
the
in
personification of analyzing and contextualizing something that is really so simple.
Right.
And I can't wait till we start talking about Glass Onion because that's literally one of my favorite things, or just the overall idea in the movie. But we got to start out with the one that gave birth to it all, Knives Out.
Yes. So Knives Out, released in the tail end of 2019, right before the pandemic. Of course, directed by Rian Johnson, and had to go look up the stats. So 4.1 rating on Letterboxd, 97% on Rotten Tomatoes, and 92% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes.
Okay.
People love this movie. I think it was sort of breath of fresh air. We could go look, see what was coming out in 2019, but I don't think there was not a lot of movies coming out like this at all. Whodunits were sort of a dead genre at that time. Obviously, there's always mysteries coming out, but things like this, very specific, they were not coming out.
And especially because it came out low-key right before the pandemic. It might be interesting for a movie that had such a smash hit in the box office to also carry home with us as we're going into the pandemic for people to continue to try and rewatch it, you know? But I would say one of my biggest regrets about both these movies is not watching it on the big screen because even just watching the movie in general, the scenes and the way that they compose the shots are amazing. The camera work is beautiful. So not to be able to see it on a TV screen does not compare to being able to see it and hear everything on a big screen. So if I could go back, I would definitely go and watch it because they truly are amazing movies.
Yeah, definitely.
So getting into Knives Out, we're gonna start talking about the storyline. Well, let's just say this will be a spoiler episode.
Yes, spoiler.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen this 3-year-old movie, I don't know what to tell you.
Pause this, watch the movie,
go
come
watch.
back.
Knives Out, I couldn't find it on streaming.
Really? Knives Out?
I didn't know where it was at. Glass Onion is on Netflix, so if you have Netflix,
I'm pretty sure it was sponsored by Netflix as well. It helped to make the movie.
Yeah, Glass Onion is a Netflix movie. It came out in theaters, I think a month before, but then it came out on Netflix on, I think, Christmas Eve.
Yeah, and another big regret, not seeing that one in theaters as well.
Definitely watched it on the computer screen.
Definitely watched it on TV screen at my door. But okay, so back to Knives Out. We're circling back. We're coming back. We're gonna talk about the storyline, and especially we're gonna spit some facts about old whodunit movies and why this genre died and why it's now coming back.
Okay, so I looked up some articles trying to see where did whodunits come from, why did they stop getting made, not even necessarily stop getting made, but made in the specific way that they were in the 20s, 30s, 40s, even up to the 70s. So the term whodunit was coined in 1930 in a movie review of a movie called Half-Mass Murder by Donald Groden. Whodunits started gaining popularity in between the two world wars, and then they took off in the 40s due to the work of Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie definitely has a big influence on these movies. If you've seen anything from Agatha Christie, most likely you would have seen Murder on the Orient Express, maybe the 2017 version, but I'm talking about the 1976 version. So 1976 version of Murder on the Orient Express, I think this might have been one of the first whodunit movies to have this big ensemble cast. So Albert Finney, if you've ever seen Annie 1982, he is Daddy Warbucks.
Oh my gosh.
Lauren Bacall, Ingrid Bergman. I can't even start to name all the movies she's been in, but one of my favorites is Indiscreet with Cary Grant. Jacqueline set. Sean Connery, James Bond, Anthony Perkins from Psycho, and Jean-Pierre Dell. Huge ensemble cast, just like Knives Out, just like Glass Onion. So you can see the inspiration there. And Knives Out, to me, definitely brought back the whodunit genre in the way it was on Murder on the Orient Express, or even Death on the Nile, or even Clue. We'll talk about Clue later. So yeah, I like how the movie definitely makes fun of the genre, but we can still see where it pays homage to Agatha Christie.
Yeah, Agatha Christie was such an amazing literary figure, just especially as a female writer who really shaped this genre. And for me, Murder on the Orient Express will always have a soft spot in my heart because it was literally the only movie I can remember that I literally cried watching the movie, which is really weird because I feel like people are like, what made you necessarily cry about this movie? But actually, when the plot unraveled and I found out the actual motive that everyone had for the murder that took place on the Orient Express, LOL title, but it moved me to tears. And like, I do not cry during movies. That's like my thing. So for this to be the only movie that I've really ever cried in, for some reason I was like, this is so touching. I understand murder now. Like, for me, that was just, I love that moment. So I absolutely adore that movie. Murder on the Nile.
Death on the Nile.
Yeah. Death on the Nile.
Death on the Nile.
It's a movie.
Yeah. It happened.
Well,
at least when did that movie come out? 2021?
I want to say
2022?
Yeah. I want to say it was relatively kind of early.
Yeah.
But
at least the remake, sorry guys, it was not good.
Yeah. Well, the shot, like movie itself, let's just say like the shots, the composition, the actual movie itself was nice. I just couldn't follow along with the plot. Yeah. Because I feel like I can't really show remorse or sadness for the death of a woman who stole her best friend's fiance. And then they spent the literal whole plot of the movie trying to convince me that their love was pure enough to not understand why her best friend was obviously upset that you stole her fiance. Like, I don't know. It wasn't clicking in my head. But yeah, I can't compare the two.
Yeah.
But definitely getting into the plot of Knives Out, we obviously open up with the Thrombey family, of the family of Harlan Thrombey, which is actually, his name is a play on a famous whodunit character by the last name of Thrombo, which I actually thought was really, really cool, how they continued to like take different parts of different murder mysteries and all these different characters and put them together. But basically going back to the family Harlan Thrombey, who is a famous murder mystery writer who is basically a millionaire, almost billionaire off of his publication company and his writing itself. It opens up on, I think it was the night of his birthday. Yeah. It was the night of his birthday. He had his whole family together, which comprises of a lot of different wacky characters that we will start to get into a little bit later. But basically the storyline takes place where we open up on the morning after his birthday. His entire family is asleep in the house, and his, I guess, would be caregiver, housekeeper of some sort, Laura?
Joseph Gordon-Levitt having a credit on Google before the lady who was actually in the movie.
That's what insane. I'm saying. Oh, we also have to hint that JGL, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who really is one of my favorite actors.
I love Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
He is such a fine actor. And I don't mean his acting skills, guys. That is a fine actor.
We're getting sidetracked.
Like, he was actually in the director's, Rian Johnson's, one of his first movies, which was called Brick, right? Which is also a whodunit kind of mystery movie. It's a little bit leaning more towards Fight Club than Knives Out.
It's like a neo-noir movie. They're trying to figure out who killed. Joseph Gordon-Levitt is the main character, I believe, and they're trying to figure out who killed his girlfriend.
Yes.
So it's cool that Rian Johnson has put Joseph Gordon-Levitt in his following movies that are also mysteries.
Yes.
And Joseph Gordon-Levitt has not actually been in the movies yet. He's always a voice.
Yes.
In Knives Out, he was the voice of the detective on the TV, on the show Marta was watching.
Basically, let's actually continue the plot so we can tell you how he's incorporating the plot. So basically, we still have not found her name.
I literally
I'm looking at it.
Who is?
And I do not see her.
I don't see her.
Here.
Fran.
It was Fran. Fran, thank you. So Fran, who is the caregiver maid of the house, goes to check up on Mr. Thrombey, give him his morning breakfast, and actually finds him with his throat slit on the couch. And I actually love this tidbit. I do not know if this is an actual fact, but I'm going to spit this like a fact because this can't be a coincidence that both times that the murder actually took place, or the murder was found in Knives Out and in Glass Onion, instead of there being a big scream like every single whodunit movie, they actually say sugar honey iced tea. I was trying to find like a very way so you to get what I was saying. But yeah, so it actually takes place with her almost dropping the tray and saying this, and then cuts to the scene. So it actually, we open up about, what was it, like a couple weeks later after Harlan's death, and there's being opened up investigation. We open up on Marta, who is played by Ana de Armas, who is, to me, is such a phenomenal character, but we'll get more into that later. And of course, with her family, which includes her mother and her sister. Her sister is watching a detective show, which is literally spewing about murder and did you do it, and like basically screaming gruesome facts, in which the mother starts yelling at the sister. And the voice of the detective on the show is JGL, which is of course his big cameo in the movie. So it kind of goes into the mother saying that the sister is being very insensitive over the fact that and Armis's character Marta had just had a friend slit his throat. So I kind of love that touching into the family. The family actually said not her boss or the man she cared for, because she is his nurse, but she actually said her friend has slit his throat. Oh, you can see throughout the movie, which is a constant track, is that Marta never really talks about Harlan as if he was her employer. Right. He only talks about his family as if they were her employers. But the Harlan was truly a friend, which is something I really love that carried throughout the movie, and really was such an important pillar into the actual mystery itself, because without that fact we would have been a lot more lost in the donut hole, as Benoit likes to say. Which of course brings us into the main character of the Knives Out franchise and everyone's beloved southern drawl detective, Benoit Blanc, which is played by Daniel Craig, the former
James Bond,
Mr. 007. Yes. Which is actually really cute. And I actually want to mention this really quickly. The scene in which Marta starts confessing to the family something really big that we will mention later in the plot, and he storms in to stop her after reading an envelope, that was actually the very first time that they had heard his Benoit Blanc voice. So the reactions by everyone in the room was genuine, because they were kind of just like, who is this? Yeah. Because of course a British man speaking as a southern.
Why does James Bond have a southern accent?
Literally, it's very shocking. But now that we've kind of got it into the plot, and you're seeing how storyline is starting to spill out, basically the detectives go in to start questioning the family, question Marta, start questioning everybody, and figure out how Harlan committed suicide, or if this actually wasn't suicide, of course, because Harlan was a very wealthy man who was in a house with all of his family members at one night, and no one knew he was dead on the night of his birthday where he's supposed to be happy. Right. You know, things just start clicking together, and that's of course when Benoit Blanc comes in. So now we're definitely going to get into more of I want to touch on the character building and the settings and the sets in this movie.
Okay, well, I did find a quote from the director Rian Johnson, and he says, "They say casting is 90% of directing," and it was really true in this case. As I was reading this, they asked him, it was a letterbox interview, and they asked him, was it hard to get everybody who was in this ensemble cast? And he says, no. He says after Daniel Craig got involved, everything just kind of... No, he literally says after Daniel Craig got involved, everything fell into place. Like,
I would have played a lamp against the wall to be in the same room with Daniel Craig.
He literally says, Daniel Craig got involved, and then that's when Michael Shannon got in. And then Lakeith Stanfield said he was going to do it.
If Lakeith... Bro, all you needed was Lakeith Stanfield. I would have played a light bulb. Like, come on.
I always forget that Lakeith Stanfield is in this movie.
Yes, and a lot of people were touching on Lakeith Stanfield, like, as an actor, that it was really interesting for him to be in a movie like this, and just Lakeith Stanfield as an actor in general, because he's been in very high caliber projects.
Right.
But he also isn't very much a household name quite yet, because a lot of the movies he does are very interesting, kind of just like Knives Out.
Right.
They're part of like kind of niche genres, or almost like these different areas in these different types of film. He bounces around to a lot of different types of projects. So it's interesting to see his acting skills kind of just be stretched in so many different places. And that's why people were so interested in him in this movie.
Yeah, I definitely think Lakeith Stanfield is a character actor.
Definitely, yeah.
Almost like Philip Seymour Hoffman. A lot of the characters that he plays, I feel like only he could play them. Like a Darius on Atlanta, or his character from, what's that movie called? Sorry to Bother You.
Or Get Out.
Yeah, or Get Out.
That's like, definitely character acting.
They're very specific to him that I feel like only he could play. He has this. Yeah. He has a aura about himself.
He has an energy.
Yeah, he has an aura energy about himself that a lot of these sort of niche, weird characters, like that's the actor you would go to play those characters.
And he definitely is able to put on that mask of a character on very, very well. Because even thinking about looking at Get Out, I rarely remember that's Lakeith Stanfield playing that character. Because he looks like such an independent character from like looking at him in Sorry to Bother You, or even from Atlanta. Like his character in Atlanta is completely starkly different from any character I've seen him play so far. But I like Lakeith Stanfield in this movie. He still is a big name in this movie, even though he plays almost a smaller character once Benoit Blanc comes into the picture. But they play very well, because actually you can see in the movie, he plays Lieutenant Elliot, Detective Lieutenant Elliot, and Lakeith Stanfield's character is the only person who does not call Benoit by his name. He actually calls him Benny throughout the movie. So it shows how they actually kind of developed a kind of kinship or like liking to Benoit, and he started to really truly trust him because he started to call him Benny and not Detective Blanc or anything. Where everyone else called him Benoit Blanc or was kind of starstruck by him, Lakeith was really trying to work with him and really like form that connection with their characters, which I love.
I definitely think that's his character is interesting, especially as the only black character in this movie.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know. I think it's interesting that the only black character in the movie is the detective.
Yeah.
He's a man
of a higher status to a position they have to answer to him. But it's actually at the end of the movie when, of course, the killer's revealed, which we will talk about. Richard Drysdale, who is one of the sons of Harlan Thrombey, played by Don Johnson, who is the dad of little neo-Nazi kid, the little Trump supporter guy. He actually tries to pay off Lakeith Stanfield's character after the guy's arrested, the person's arrested, to try and like save the family and like, you know, get all the stuff back or whatever. And it's kind of interesting because it continues to play into how race and status and money especially is a really kind of subtle plot in this movie, which I absolutely love what they did with this. So gonna start talking about the plot, which is, it's so much of the plot. We have to continue to actually like pull apart almost everything and continue to pull everything apart.
This Knives Out is like a story within a story within a story within a story. It's crazy.
Oh, and also since we're starting to introduce the characters, we're definitely should start talking about the title cards, because this movie is very unique in that they actually include title cards for the time that has passed in the different settings, the different characters that are being introduced, and the title cards actually move and glitch on the screen because Rian Johnson wanted to shoot this movie as if it was being shot on an old film camera. So a lot of the light bleeds off of the sides, which we don't really see much in movies anymore. We see a lot in old movies. The title cards glitch and switch because they were actually overlaid onto the scene, so they kind of have that effect. It's actually really interesting how well he wanted to stick true to the look. And so especially with introducing the characters, which we'll start going into, Linda Drysdale, which is played by the very ever famous Jamie Lee Curtis, who is the original Scream Queen always. Right. And actually in the scene, Halloween, guys, watch Halloween. That is Jamie Lee Curtis.
The original
You're like,
Halloween.
That's Jamie Lee Curtis? Yeah, that's Jamie Lee Curtis. That's how she got her start.
And we have to talk about Jamie Lee Curtis being in this movie.
Yes.
And her mother is the woman from Psycho. And we just talked about Murder on the Orient Express with Anthony Perkins, who is the Psycho from Psycho.
Literally, Jamie Lee Curtis has horror and mystery movies flowing through her brain. Yes. Her mother being... Not even Jamie Lee Curtis isn't even the original Scream Queen. Her mother is the original Scream Queen. So it's actually really interesting how even when they introduced her, you can see a reflection of a window in her glasses, which is actually a built window pane that they included hanging over Jamie Lee's head to continue the continuation that there is supposed to be a window behind her. And as you can actually see with the introduction, they play a lot with the camera shots by hiding some of the detectives. So like halfway through the interrogation scenes, scenes, I didn't even know Benoit was sitting back there because of the continuous shifts with perspective between Lakeith Stanfield's character, Lieutenant Elliot, and the second detective trooper. Well, he's not a detective, he's a trooper. Trooper Wagner, who's played by Noah Segan, which I absolutely love because Detective Lieutenant Elliot is really about his job. He's really about trying to figure out what's going on. Where Trooper Wagner, who's played by Noah Segan, is a true fanboy. He's fanning over the fact that he's a fan of Harlan Thrombey. He's fanning over the fact that every single one of Thrombey's kids had like their own kind of connection to the fortune, which we start talking about. So Linda, being Harlan's only daughter, is what we would kind of describe, or she describes herself as a self-made woman. She's kind of one of the only characters who actually has their own line of business, but she kind of says like, I'm a self-made woman, I'm strong, like I can understand my dad, I'm just as smart as my dad, which is something that she really wanted to push, that her dad had a very soft spot for her throughout most of their lives, and they played a lot of games, which is very, remember that, guys. They played a lot of games together, and connecting back to her siblings, who I'm just trying to make sure people are married to who I think they're married to.
Linda Drysdale, Richard Drysdale
they are married. Yes, and they of course both work through this company connected to Harlan. And so it's actually really interesting. They said that when Richard was recounting what was happening that night of Harlan's birthday, when he narrates it, him and Linda are at Harlan's side while he's blowing out his candles. But when we move on to Walt Thrombey, which is the other Thrombey son who runs Harlan's publishing company, it's him, Walt Thrombey, who's played by Michael Shannon, Donna Thrombey, who's played by Riki Lindholm, and their son Jacob Thrombey, who's played by Jaden Martell. They are by his side when he actually blows out the candle. So it shows how Benoit is starting to realize how unreliable they are as narrators, because their narration is really based off of how they want the detectives to view them as being the perfect child in Harlan's favorite, as someone who would never do anything to their father, and paint their other siblings in a negative light. Which I think is actually really, really kind of funny in a way. And introducing the rest of the Thrombey family, of course, we have Ransom Drysdale, who's played by everyone's America's booty.
That was crazy. Captain America.
Chris Evans. Whose actual full name is Hugh Ransom Drysdale. We gotta make sure to say that, but everyone calls him Ransom. And not gonna lie, as someone who wants to become a mystery writer in the future, the name Ransom is chef's kiss. That's literally beautiful. I'm sorry. That's such a nice name.
Ransom Drysdale.
In
a murder mystery. Okay. Yeah, okay.
And of course, we continue to talk about the other characters. Of course, Harlan Thrombey, who's played by Christopher
Plummer.
Yes, Christopher Plummer. And I want to say I loved Harlan's character.
Yeah, I liked him too.
Okay, let's just state this. I love little old men as characters because they are so funny, even like little old men, period. But grumpy little old men have such a little place in my heart because I'm like, you're just so adorable.
Yeah.
Like, he gives adorable.
But Harlan, I really liked Harlan as well. Like, he was so sharp.
He was. Like, you can see how he deserved his fortune, if that makes sense.
It made sense that he was this successful mystery writer. I thought that's good storytelling.
And definitely Harlan was not oblivious to even how his own children were almost riding on his coattails in a way, and his family rode on his coattails. Because as we introduce Harlan's character a little bit more later on, we get to see a little bit more of how Harlan actually felt about his family, and a lot about how he actually had a lot of ties into how his murder took place. So let's continue to go about the characters too.
We forgot Joni and Meg.
Yes, Joni and Meg. I was like, there's a third son. So who's the third son?
Joni, played by Toni Collette, and Meg, played by Katherine Langford.
Yes.
I love Toni Collette. I love Toni Collette.
This was my
she's such a good actor.
This is my introduction to Toni Collette.
Really?
I've seen her clips of her, of course, being in Hereditary.
I am your mother.
And I know as a self-proclaimed film reviewer, not seeing Hereditary is a big no-no.
But I haven't seen it either. I just can't watch it.
I know, because My friends watched it. I know what happens.
I know what
but
happens.
I don't know if I want to subject myself to making myself go through the mental torture that is having to visually see what I was told was on that screen.
Yeah, no.
I'm just gonna say
it. The decapitation is crazy.
Yeah, like I don't want to have to see someone burst into flames, especially coming from a Christian household. I don't play with demons.
Okay, so it's not just me.
No, I do not play with demons at all.
I like horror movies, but I like a little slasher, I love slasher movies.
I love the thing is, that's what I always tell people when I talk about horror movies and mystery movies is I will watch it as long as the villain is human.
Right.
If it's monsters, I can kind of be okay with that too. But when it comes to demons and stuff that is spiritually possessed,
y'all got the demons.
I'm gonna have to step away from that one real quick.
Them demons.
You got the wrong Jalen. You got the wrong show.
No, really. Wrong show. We're not talking about any demons on this show.
Absolutely not. But I mean, we can definitely start talking about more mystery and horror stuff because I definitely want that to be an avenue for us because we love talking about it. We love watching it. But demons, yeah, you kind of lost us there.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so now getting back into Knives Out, we open up, of course, with Harlan Thrombey's death, and we are starting to actually interview all of the children of Harlan Thrombey.
Right.
And just to connect that, Meg and Joni's characters are related to Harlan through Harlan's youngest son who passed away. So they're still, of course, related to them because that's his child. And interesting a little bit more about their characters. Joni is a self-proclaimed influencer who basically kind of just lives off of Harlan's checks and then of course influences with her daughter is going to SJW. I think that's how they said it. Sarah just it's like a women's college.
I think it's the same school that Kat went to in 10 Things I Hate About You.
Yeah, but I can't remember the school.
Yeah, I think it's Sarah something, guys.
Sarah
Lawrence.
Yes, that was it. She went to Sarah Lawrence, and she's graduating with something like a women's studies degree. The family doesn't actually know because, of course, you see that a lot of their perceptions, of course, rooted in their privilege.
Yeah.
You can actually see that a lot with the dialogue of how the characters interact with one another. Whereas Joni argues with one of the sons.
I believe it's Jamie Lee Curtis's husband.
No, it's not Jamie Lee Curtis's husband. It's the son. The one is actually Harlan's son.
Michael Shannon.
She argues with Michael Shannon's character about basically the whole Trump versus non-Trump debate. Right. Of course, we hear them talking about they put children in cages, which was a huge debate during Trump's presidency about taking undocumented children and putting them in cages.
Right.
We also have what Kat and her cousin basically battling because Kat, as a women's studies major, is battling who she describes as a little neo-Nazi, which is her little cousin, who's basically we learned is an internet troll who basically attacks people on Twitter and Instagram. And even as we see later into the plot, continues to use that kind of rhetoric. And we see how many times in the movie when they state Marta, who we never found out where Marta was actually from.
I'm not sure we did. Because I feel like I want to say at some point they said she was Cuban, but I don't think that's right. It was like a running gag in the movie literally. That they didn't know where she was from.
Yeah, and so basically they all say she was from Uruguay, the next thing it was Paraguay,
right,
and all these different places, and basically making like a really big deal out of the fact that she was a documented immigrant, when it actually turns out that Marta's mother was not documented, and Harlan knew this. And so that's why Harlan was actually very close to Marta, is because Marta confided this in him, and that allowed for their relationship to grow by keeping secrets with one another. And of course, one of Harlan's biggest secrets is that he hated his children. He hated his children, and he basically thought that they were all self-entitled, privileged, whiny babies, especially his son, who was played by Michael Shannon, who owned his publishing company. And he talked often about how he wishes he pushed his son to write his own mystery novels instead of begging his father to write more for him to publish and continue to get success off of. And with his daughter, Linda, he didn't really have a problem with Linda, but more with Linda's husband. Right. Because Linda's husband was actually cheating on Linda, but only staying with her because, of course, the connection to the Thrombey name.
Right. We have to talk about the whole sequence of Harlan cutting everybody off.
Yeah.
So he takes his son off the publishing. He says, you're not running the publishing company anymore.
Yeah. He pulls in Linda's husband.
Says,
I wrote this letter to Linda. It tells about everything you did. You either tell her yourself or I tell her. Of course.
Right.
And then, of course, last being Joni.
Should we find out that Harlan is paying for Meg's college, but she basically scammed Harlan into paying double,
tuition.
And she's stealing the rest of the money.
Yeah.
So all of this sets up him cutting them out the will.
Yeah. And Ransom.
Right.
And Ransom was also cut out of the will.
Ransom was cut out. Ransom was going to be cut off.
But the thing is, we actually don't really see much of Ransom in the beginning of the movie, because once Ransom finds out he's cut out of the will, he storms out.
Right.
And that brings up everyone, of course, pointing the finger at Ransom, because a lot of the family actually talks about how Ransom is a troublemaker, the black sheep. He really is just like a rich party boy who wants to just, get high and hang out and party and do all that stuff. He doesn't really want to actually do anything like go to college, in which he makes fun of Kate. That's not her name. Meg. I said Kate. That's her actual name, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kat Langford. One day I'm gonna get these names right, guys.
Yeah.
What name I'm gonna get these
that
names right?
sequence of us seeing why cut off and cut out of the will, it sets up all the motives for Harlan to be killed.
Yes, basically. But then, of course, when we get to the fact that Harlan was killed, we realize that Harlan had committed suicide. Right. So that brings us back to, is this actually a suicide or is it not? So, of course, when we get the original toxicology report and the cause of death, it was, of course, slashing of the trachea, which is slitting someone's throat. And then going into the interrogation scenes, I also wanted to point out that Benoit Blanc does not speak this entire time. He actually doesn't introduce himself at all. But he later introduces himself and says that he was actually paid by one of the family members, he does not know who, to solve the fact that it was a murder or suicide. So during the interrogation, you can see Benoit sitting in the back, and the only thing he does is play a piano chord. So basically, the piano chord was a secret signal between him and Lakeith Stanford's character for him to basically get back on track from where the family is trying to steer him off of the original questioning. So, for example, Harlan knows that the Thrombey kids aren't completely stupid. He knows that they have some kind of cunning because of who their father is. So you can see that throughout their interrogations, as they paint themselves in such a perfect light, they're secretly casting out one of their siblings, one of their nieces and nephews, somebody. And so basically when Benoit plays this keynote, he's basically telling him to ask again, where were you the night of the murder? Like, what was the actual chronological taking place of the movie? In which Benoit at the end realizes that they are all somewhat lying about the arguments that took place between the characters and Harlan. And so it's kind of very beautiful when he meets Ana de Armas' character, Marta, because you can see him look down for a very long time because he's actually seeing blood on her shoe. Right. And I know this as being like a crime person, like watching a bunch of crime movies, but mystery movies, Criminal Minds, all this stuff. When someone cuts an artery, especially as large as a trachea, there will be a splatter pattern of blood. And that was actually a big indicator that Harlan did commit suicide, because there was no interruption in that blood spatter. If there was an interruption in that blood spatter, that would show that someone probably was standing there enough for them to get blood on them. See, blood can be washed off you, but if the blood pattern is stopped on the wall or on a matter, you can tell that something was interrupting that path of the blood splatter. In which there was no interruption, so of course they thought it was a suicide. Right. But one of the first things Benoit notices about Marta's character is that she had blood on her shoe, which brings us back to the actual plot under the secret plot of the Knives Out movie. Because as Benoit explains it, and what I love about this movie, he says it's a donut hole inside of a donut hole. It's like he felt like people were lying on top of the already mystery, but he felt like there was a second mystery that was underlying inside of the actual mystery, which was true. It turns out that while Marta was giving Harlan his medicine, she actually believed that she gave him, I think it was 100 milligrams of, I was saying this so fluidly too.
I think it was morphine, in which Harlan called the good stuff. Right. So basically the good stuff was to help him ease his pain and go to sleep. She was supposed to give him 3 milligrams of morphine and 100 milligrams of cortisol, which is supposed to help with his blood pressure. Right. But instead she gave him 100 milligrams of morphine and 3 milligrams of cortisol, which would send him almost into automatic heart failure and heart attack, and he would be dead in less than 10 minutes. So, of course, Harlan, being Marta's friend, a true friend, wanted
her to have nothing to do with being blamed for his murder. So he said, okay, I'll teach you how to get outside of the house without being noticed. And on top of that, from there, I will basically take care of it. So it shows a very long 10-minute scene of him and Marta going back and forth because Marta wants to save him. That's her friend, which is, like I said, a very underlying subject in the movie and basically solidifies her innocence. And especially something that Daniel Craig's character, Benoit Blanc, notices is that from the beginning, he said that Marta is a good person. Right. He realized that she truly has heart and she truly did care about Harlan. So that's where we get the whole donut hole inside of a donut hole, because even though she has something to do with the murder, he knew that something wasn't right, murder him. And so for him, that's why he was like, okay, this is where the donut hole starts to collapse. Going back in on itself, Harlan gives Marta this elaborate ruse to get out of the house, state the time that she is leaving, turn back around, come back into the house, and then pretend to be Harlan so people know that he was alive when she left. And then basically he slit his throat at the last minute, which of course proved that she was not able to save him because he basically did the job for her. Right. Yeah. So which leads to the family, of course, being upset and still believing that there is something a little amiss, because we bring in the actual big banger of the entire movie, which is the fact that Harlan actually cut all of the children out of the will and gave everything to Marta. The house, the publishing company, the money, everything to Marta. And of course, stating that he gave this to Marta was because Marta was his friend, a true good person who genuinely cared about him, unlike his family, who only cared about him for his money or any time that it was, good for them or profitable for them. Yeah. So going into it, that's where we're finally introduced to Chris Evans' character, Ransom, for, I guess, a proper introduction in which he decides to tell everyone to eat sugar honey iced tea as they are all furiously screaming at the actual lawyer who reads that Anna, de Armas' character Marta, is getting everything that they have ever believed that they were entitled to. In which I also like this scene because despite Joni and the brother really like arguing about the will, the only person who genuinely shows any anger is Linda's character. Right. And people said that the reason Linda's character actually did this because Linda was the only person who genuinely made something herself. So she is banking off of this money and this name because that is genuinely all she really has for her company. Whereas for her brother, he loses his job. He loses a job and the rug is just slipped underneath him. And Joni was already cut off. So she was just angry that she couldn't weasel any more money out of Harlan in the family, especially because now that Harlan's dead. Right. I feel like a lot of people were happy that Harlan was dead because they believed that Harlan had not done any edits to the will yet. But they didn't know that he actually did. And the only person who actually did, which we learn later on, was Ransom, which is why he stormed out. And so that's why during this scene, Ransom is just seen like chuckling, laughing, and making fun of his family members, which was a big indicator that he already has some idea as to what was going on. Which leads us to, in my personal opinion, one of my favorite shots, which is a shot of Marta trying to leave the house while all the family members yelling at her and telling her to give the money back.
Where it switches the handheld.
Yes, he takes it off the dolly, he lifts it off the dolly, and you can see the chaos which he wanted to display through the handheld motion of them like swarming her and then of course when they drop behind the car to show her in the driver's seat, they go back to the dolly to get that steady look. And even when they got that steady dolly movement of her leaping out of her front seat into the passenger seat of Ransom's car, because Ransom actually serves as her getaway, which he takes her to a restaurant in which she eats beans. Which was literally one of the shocking moments. Because when I tell you, because I watched this with my boyfriend. We were literally sitting there and we were like, we weren't even listening to the scene. We were just like, is she eating beans? Yeah, she's eating beans.
I don't know what kind of restaurant
with like,
that was.
No, it was ground beef and beans.
Yeah.
And I've had that before. But I was kind of just like, why would you order that from a restaurant? What? Like, especially at like such a distressing, I feel like I would order the lobster. If it was me and I realized that I was now a billionaire.
Something is telling me that Ransom ordered the food.
Right.
I always just
But he wasn't eating it, so that's why I was like, so did she order?
I don't know. Even though he wasn't eating, so I don't know. Even the first time I watched this movie, when that scene comes on, I always just assume that he was the one that ordered the food. I think it's because like he's the one that's driving. Yeah, he took her to the restaurant. He ordered the food.
I feel like he's in charge here,
right?
You know, and I was wondering because the movie is shot in New England to really get that kind of that mystery, that wilderness, that mystery, which I really want to talk about the actual setting of the house, which I'm obsessed with Harlan's house and everything about it. But really the fact that I was wondering if that was like a thing in New England. Like maybe
the beans?
Beans and toast. Like I know it's like a British thing. Beans and toast.
I don't think so. I'm originally from Connecticut. I've never seen that before.
I believe you. But if someone from New England happens to be listening,
anybody from the tri-state area, just let us
know why
if you're from
if you do eat beans and toast.
Yeah, New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, let us know.
Yeah,
I've never seen it.
That's really interesting.
I've never seen it, but I'm also black, so
yeah. I knew it was a thing in Britain, but I was like, maybe it's like British core. Like you know, like maybe they were trying to be like quirky. Like,
it was giving. I don't know. It was giving like a lumberjack food.
Yeah, like it was giving like we're up in a cabin, like in a bed and breakfast type. So I was like, maybe it's like British themed. That's the Ryan Johnson. Answer this. What was she eating? Why was she eating beans and toast?
Yeah, well, we're going to tweet you on Twitter.
Yeah, we are going to tweet you on Twitter.
At Ryan Johnson.
But, okay. And then I also love, because I paid a lot of attention to the actual props in the scene. You can see the sweater on Harlan beginning to, not Harlan. On Ransom to start
Chris Evans
to start unraveling, and that really goes back to what we actually learned was the true mystery in the beginning, because Anna actually starts to tell him everything that actually happened with Harlan and what took place, in which everything starts to truly unravel. In which this is actually where I noticed, and I guess this is a good place to state, that Ransom is the killer. Yeah. So that actually shows that Ransom's plan had actually unraveled on top of him, because as we find out later on that
she didn't actually kill him. She didn't actually kill him. So as we mentioned before, she gave him the wrong doses.
100 milligrams.
She thought she gave him 100 milligrams of morphine.
Yes.
And the 3 milligrams of cortisol.
But she turned out
because she does it so much, she knew the weights of the two.
She doses like the dilution, the color of the serum, which is actually tested by Benoit Blanc, who switches the labels in front of her for the cortisol and I can never remember the second one.
Morphine.
Thank you. The cortisol and the morphine, and sits them on the table. And as Marta goes to pick up the morphine, because it has a cortisol label, she subconsciously puts it down and picks up the morphine label because she knows it's cortisol.
Right. And so the reason why she didn't actually kill him is because Ransom, as we said, is the real killer.
Yeah, he switched the
labels, but because she knows it subconsciously, she
picked the right one.
She picked the right one.
Oh no,
still.
I think it was she actually did give him the right dosage because she didn't know the labels were switched. Right. That was it. And basically, we actually find out that Harlan did, in fact,
he just killed himself.
Suicide because he wanted to protect her. And basically, that's what Benoit was trying to put together the whole time, is how did she actually not truly kill him and how he truly killed himself. Because from the beginning, as we said, Harlan knew that she was a good person. Benoit knew that she was a good person. And I feel like we skipped one of the most important
I was just going to say that.
Facts. She can't lie. She literally can't lie.
If she lies, she literally throws up.
Yeah. So that's her quirky character flaw, which I think is so interesting that they make. I don't really like when people give characters quirky character flaws that are kind of like loopholes in the plot. But the way that they influenced it into the plot is truly beautiful. Is that Marta actually has a physical reaction to lying where she vomits. And so that's why anytime that she vomits, Benoit knows that she's lying. So for the fact that he absolutely knows, well, the thing is, the whole time, Marta is able to conceal the fact that she killed Harlan, because at this point in time in the movie, she believes that she genuinely did kill Harlan. So she would have actually threw up if she said that she didn't kill him. And it's actually really beautiful the way she goes over and covers her steps, which is going into like the setting and the plot a little bit more. So we start off by going to check around the room. We go to the security gate, which actually has a recording. And there's a live playback of Marta's character talking to Harlan as he gives her the plan. And as she's leaving the house, she checks her time. She knows the time, just like Harlan said. But she does not remember she's supposed to turn before or after an elephant statue. It turns out she was supposed to turn before the elephant statue, but she turned after, being caught on the camera. She actually uses a magnet that she found on the fridge to scramble the tapes. As they are walking through the yard to try and figure out how someone got back into the house without being seen, she realized that because it rained the night before, her mud tracks are actually leading to the house. In a way, she runs ahead and covers her own tracks and then calls the dogs to cover the tracks even further for her. And then even when she finds a piece of the broken platform that she stepped on trying to crawl into the trick window, which I'm going to have a trick window in my house. You all will not know where it is, but it will exist. She throws it and the dog even retrieves it for her, and her mud prints are found on the steps leading up to Harlan's room, which is how Benoit figures out that someone got back into the house, but still not believing that it's Anna.
Right.
Anna Darmus's character, Marta. So it's actually really interesting how you root for Marta because you know she's not at fault, but you root for Benoit because you know Benoit is a good detective. It kind of shows how throughout this whole movie that they are really highlighting the different perspectives of the different viewers, like how some are shown through Anna's point of view, some are showing through Benoit's point of view. I keep saying Anna Marta. I just love her name. Anna de Armas is such a beautiful name to me. I'm kind of obsessed with it.
But I think this movie definitely shows how whodunit movies or mystery movies don't have to be so cut and dry. So like for a part of the movie, we think Anna de Armas, Marta, is the killer. But we know she's not some evil person that just decided to kill her boss. So yeah. And something I said in my notes, and I was saying the reveal of the actual killer is one of the most interesting things about this movie, because in both movies, this and Glass Onion, that killer is the person you would think is the killer. But both movies, the setup, like, they take you through so much to where you as a viewer start to double think. Like, maybe I shouldn't be judging this person when the whole time you should be judging this person because they did do it.
And I like how it's kind of a twist on regular whodunits, because most of the time it's like the maid did it, the nurse did it, and it's kind of even a play on sometimes it can even be racial, where sometimes that character who is a different race is being the killer because of something that's connected to race. So it's really interesting how Marta's whole character was being protected because of her race and gifted because of her perspective as being who she is as a was once undocumented immigrant. A family member is undocumented. Now she's just trying to come up in this country that she's now from, and just trying to do the best she can for her family, which is kind of the opposite of Harlan's kids, who aren't doing what's best for their family. They actually hate their family. They only care about the money. And so it's really interesting how they compare these two characters, especially in the last beautiful shot with her on the balcony above all of them and them looking up at her from the ground with Harlan's favorite mug, which says, "My house, my coffee, my rules," which Ryan also used as a prop of ownership. That was supposed to be a display of ownership throughout the family. So going forward, we actually continue on the mystery taking place after Marta's character has her beans and toast with Ransom. We actually find out that she's now being blackmailed by someone who knows what happened. And of course, at this point, Marta thinks that she killed Harlan. So continuing on, it turns out the coroner's office was set on fire. And at this point, this is when I knew that she didn't do it. This is when I knew that she didn't do it, because I'm like, who in their right mind would really take all that time to burn down a coroner's office unless they knew for sure they could not face any repercussions? I'm just saying, if they see a little girl throwing Molotov cocktails into the building, they would arrest her, no problem. But if it was Ransom who actually did do it, he could get off.
It definitely showed that there was something completely different going on. Because
all the stuff that was going on wasn't something that would seem like it was at the work of Marta. It would seem like there was a third party involved.
Right. Because the stuff with everything that was going on with Marta, it just didn't make sense.
It felt like everything else was making Marta own up to her realities, except for like Marta wasn't actually influencing anything. I feel like everything was influencing her, which is also how I kind of figured out it was Ransom, because even when she checked her email to get like the position for her to get the note from Fran, he told her to check her email. He was like, you haven't got any texts, any calls, no emails? He's like, oh, I haven't checked my email. And like even going to the coroner's office was Ransom's idea.
Ransom he was seeming
if he was trying to help her,
way too helpful compared to what we had heard and seen about Ransom, like before he even came into the scene where they cut everybody off.
And at this point, it was also like Ransom was trying to make it seem like he was doing it out of the goodness of his heart.
Right.
But he actually asked Marta for his cut of the inheritance back for his help. And that's when it all really clicked for me. Because I'm like, not only is he getting away with murder, screwing his entire family, making Marta the villain, and then also getting his cut of the ransom. You know what I mean? Like, it really was a ransom.
That was crazy.
And then, of course, finding Fran dead or dying from an injection of morphine. She says, you did this, in which Marta believes that Fran had actually seen her. She was actually killed by this second party person who we have no idea is trying to like blackmail her.
Right.
And then she gets the letter, which actually has Harlan's coroner report, which shows that he was killed by the morphine, in which she opens and starts to confess to the family, and Benoit Blanc is beautifully introduced, in which I also actually saw this noted that most of the time when you open up the big envelope, it's a big reveal, and they did this twice with Linda's envelope, which reveals our husband is cheating, because when her husband actually opens the envelope after everything is resolved, it shows that there's nothing on it. So he believes, of course, it was just Harlan messing with him.
Right.
And then, of course, when Benoit opens up the envelope behind Marta as she's explaining everything, he rushes in and kind of like takes over the conversation. And at that moment, I knew, of course, it showed that Harlan was not killed, of course, by morphine, but he had the, of course, regular injection of 3 milligrams of morphine and 100 milligrams of cortisol, showing that he truly did commit suicide, which knows that now that we know that someone has switched the labels, we finally confront Ransom, in which Ransom confesses, because we figure out that Fran
was saying, instead of saying, you did this, which is what Marta thought she was saying, we find out that Ransom's name is Hugh Ransom,
which we mentioned earlier in this episode.
Yeah, so she was saying Hugh did this because Fran was the only person that called him Hugh.
Actually, all the staff called him
all the staff called him
because they hated him, and Ransom was an affectionate nickname. And so it kind of goes back to the fact that Fran actually saw Ransom switch the labels, and Fran was actually also killed by Ransom.
Right.
And so Marta lied and said that Fran had actually survived the morphine attack and was going to confess and said that was Ransom, in which she stifles her throw up long enough for Ransom to confess to the murder, in which she throws up on him after he confesses.
So gross.
In which he grabs a knife and tries to kill her, which actually goes right back to Harlan's first line about Ransom and his idiocy, is that even though he's very quick to the lunge and quick to the pounce, he can never tell a fake knife from a real one, in which he grabs a fake knife and attempts to stab her, which results in his arrest.
Right. All those knives. And he picked the fake one.
Right. But he can never tell one. And that concludes our summary of Knives Out and all of the beautiful layers and all the knives that we had to literally pull out of this body that so many people wanted to kill. I'm yawning. Wanted to kill Harlan. And at the end of the day, I truly think that this was a beautiful movie, not only visually, but just the way that this plot was put together, of being stuck in this New England coastal home on the edge of a cliff in the mist, in the rain, and all these beautiful characters who were comprised of like such caricatures.
Yeah.
So that's all I can really say, which really plays into whodunit mysteries, is because all these characters truly are caricatures. It brings you back to the original big coastal house and a family and who killed to get the money. It all kind of comes back together, but does it in a way that's so fresh and new and interesting, but also adds that layer of politics into it, in which we also have to remember that throughout this exchange, Marta was almost a trophy to the family and less as a family member, in which, of course, the family understands that Harlan has such a love for Marta. They say that she is part of the family, but Harlan obviously sees them treat her as a commodity, especially when Joni and the son start to talk about the Trump immigrants debate. they actually start to reflect that he calls Marta over in what his memory is a very kind and gentle and loving way, and she was happy to oblige. She's actually dragged into this conversation where she has to defend legal immigrancy over illegal immigrancy, which she actually has ties to both and has her own opinions, but is afraid to actually say something because of the power they have over her. In which even during the conversation, as he speaks for her, he hands her a plate to be taken away as if she was a maid, not a nurse, which is a very stark difference. She's a nurse, not a maid.
Exactly.
In which he doesn't care, because either way, she's being paid to work so she can do what he wants. In which that's why I believe really highlights Harlan's and Marta's friendship, because he saw that and he kind of recognized. You can see and it was really beautiful the way that you can really see everyone's true intentions through their actions and the way they actually talked, which is something that Harlan, Marta, and Benoit were able to pick up on, and that's what truly made them all kindred spirits.
And I think one of the things that stood out to me about like the plot of the movie, or like just the things that happened in the movie and the characters, was Meg.
Oh yes, Meg's betrayal of Marta.
Yes. So as we know, Meg, she's a women's studies major. She goes to Sarah Lawrence, and she's a feminist. She loves everybody. But when it came down to it, when the money was gone, she stabbed Marta in the back.
And even during that scene, they zeroed in on her eyes, and I believe that was a classic like whodunit shot of just being able to see the light of your eyes. They said they really did that because they wanted to show how Meg was covering her true intentions to Marta over the phone, as her family is actually behind her, pushing her to do this. And it's actually also really interesting because Meg always tried to portray herself as a friend to Marta, you know, trying to give her drugs, keeping her secrets, trying to like relate to her about how terrible her family is. But the thing is, no matter what, Meg benefits from being a Thromby. She benefits from being a part of that family where Marta does not, and that of course showed where her true loyalties lied by the fact, you know, what was going on.
I feel like her character specifically,
I would say is real. Real.
It really is real. It's very real, and I feel like it speaks to the concept of white feminism.
True. I was gonna say that.
At the end of the day, Marta was a person of color.
Yeah.
And she came from a totally different background.
Yeah.
And she has totally different values than the people who are the Thrombies. And
privileges.
Right. And so even Meg, she's a women's studies major. Her dad died. Like, that's cool. But she still comes from a place of privilege. Yeah. And she's still benefiting from the privilege of having a rich white grandfather.
And that definitely stands out with a lot of people who claim to be allies of and they try to pull up their own little traumas to make it seem like I stand with you. But when it comes actually down to it, the treatment of Meg versus her family, which she tried to compare it to Marta a lot too, by being like trying to make it seem as if she was the black sheep of the family because she believed in all this fairness. But when it came down to it, they made fun of the fact that you studied women's studies at Sarah Lawrence, not the fact that you were an immigrant, and the fact that they make you carry plates, and the fact that they make you a living prop in their house. Which I also want to point out a lot with the setting is that Harlan had props all around his house that represented the different stories that he actually wrote. And so I do think a lot of the props played with the movie, especially because the coroner's report was hidden in a prop in Harlan's house in which Fran and Meg used to hide joints. And so it showed a lot how the different props, even the fake knife that Ransom tried to use to stab Marta, the actual knife that Ransom used to slit his own throat, the backgammon game which was thrown onto the floor, which alerted Jody to that Harlan was still awake and there was something going on upstairs. All these different things. It showed how the setting and the props really played into the different characters, and how the characters were almost props themselves in this moving almost chessboard to fill in the donut hole inside of the donut hole. And especially when everything actually came together, Daniel Craig's head fit into the hole that was in the knife kind of thrown. And they showed that Rian Johnson always put during the interrogation, all the characters were always to the right, a little shifted out of the center, because they had not put together the center. And Marta was actually the center. She was a person who filled in the center first, and then Daniel Craig did, which I think is really cool too.
So I actually have another quote from Rian Johnson about this movie. So he said, so for me, because talking about, you know, creating a whodunit movie in this day and age. So he said, so for me, what was interesting is, can I put the engine of a Hitchcock thriller in the middle of a whodunit? have a whodunit that then turns into a Hitchcock thriller that turns back into a whodunit. That was kind of the starting point for me from a genre work point of view.
I like that.
So, I don't know, like, I literally wrote down, I said, I think these movies are literally genius.
I think so too.
I think they're genius. And because this genre of movie, like a whodunit, but it's also a thriller, but it's also you have to figure all of these different pieces out. But I still think they're the perfect kind of movie to have the kind of social commentary that they do. Because you're getting all of these different characters that you can create, and they have these different backgrounds. And it's not easy to have it comment on what our society is like, but in a sense it is easy to comment on certain things about our society because you have all of these different pieces that you can just mold and create to be these representations of people in our real life.
And it is truly kind of beautiful how everything comes together in a whodunit. And I think he did an amazing job of really keeping us guessing, because not only playing with just chronological order, style, just all of it just comes together beautifully. Truly, to get Knives Out, you have to go and you gotta watch it. You have to truly watch the beauty that is the composition of Knives Out. So please go do that.
Thanks for listening to us ramble about Knives Out. But guys, we have to ramble about Knives Out because there's so many different facets of the movie, from the plot to the writing to the cinematography to everything.
The actors
and the actors, like the history of whodunits. We had to talk about the history of whodunits before we started talking about Knives Out. But yeah, guys, so thank you guys so much for listening. Okay, and that has been it for this week's episode of the Streetlights Podcast. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at the Streetlights Podcast. And you can find me, Janelle, at Janelle Ismay on Instagram, JANELLEISMAY. And you can find my co-host,
that is JJ McDuffey at JJMCDUFFEY.
And make sure you come out and play with us next Tuesday.
But you better come home before Streetlights come on. Bye, y'all. The Streetlights Podcast is a product of WANM-FM 90.5 in the School of Journalism and Graphic Communications at Florida A&M University.